I want to ask you several questions about the Congressional Black Caucus, one of the more interesting institutions inside the House of Representatives. But I'd like to start, actually, with the reaction of the Congressional Black Caucus in 2000 after the Supreme Court in Bush versus Gore concluded that President Bush had won the election. Many members of the Congressional Black Caucus felt that as a personal blow at the time. Can you explain at all what the emotions were, what was behind that, and whether it was as personally felt as many of us were led to believe at the time?
Well, I felt what happened in Florida was a carefully worked out conspiracy, and I noticed almost nobody wanted to use that word. The Civil Rights Commission and its investigation and hearings, even my colleagues on the caucus, nobody liked the word conspiracy, but I think it was a conspiracy orchestrated at a high level in the state of Florida. That many things could not go wrong in one state without there having been a conspiracy. And many different things did go wrong. Many tricks were pulled of various kinds, but I think the most dastardly deeds were done to the black community, the minority community, but Hispanics too, so I'm sure. But the black community had to suffer from a number of tricks that were pulled aimed at the black community. The taking of people, the removal of people's names from the rolls because they had some kind of criminal record, which later on turned out to be false. That they moved a lot of people who had no criminal record, and they blamed it all on the firm that they hired to do that, and they got away with it. You know, on the day they had police out in black communities lined up as if they were threatening to search people or do something to them, and they frightened a lot of people who didn't want to go to the polls at all. And then at the polling places themselves, there was this loose kind of thing that our folks objected to. That kept happening, and nothing was done about it. So we were angry at Al Gore and the Democrats for not fighting harder, and the Supreme Court for reversing itself completely. It was a Supreme Court which insisted that certain things belong to the states should decide, and yet they usurped the Florida. When we got the Florida Supreme Court going in the right direction finally, they usurped the powers of the Florida Supreme Court and they intervened. It was a fix as far as we're concerned. There's no polite way to talk about it except the fix was in. And we were very angry about it, and fortunately some of my colleagues challenged the whole notion and wanted to, in the electoral college process, make a protest, which we didn't get any support for on that go-round. Later on, 4 years later, we did get Barbara Boxer in the Senate to help us.
So I wanted to ask you that question then. On the day that the election had to be certified in the House of Representatives, a few Democratic senators came for that day. Not all of them, certainly, and Republicans as well. Al Gore was presiding. He had asked the Democratic senators not to object. And members of the Black Caucus were pleading with the senators in their own party, all of whom were white, to have just one of them simply object, to throw it all into question again. What was the feeling, your own feeling, and the feelings of your colleagues on that day?
Well, leading up to that, there was a lot of anger and despair, and it gave way to confusion because the caucus actually took a vote and said, since we can't get a senator, we won't even challenge it. We won't do anything. And later, a group that was so angry stayed in Washington, and they did have some kind of challenge, as history will show. But it was the refusal of any member of the Senate to support us that led us to officially call it off. We were not, as a caucus, going to challenge it. But thank God some very angry and emotional people did stay, and at least we got what you might call a de facto challenge on the floor.
But did it feel like just an ordinary political defeat, which people suffer in politics all the time, or did it feel like something more personal, or was it even as going so far as to say that it felt humiliating? I'm trying to understand at what level the inability to change that result or challenge the result was felt.
Well, we felt that we were on the cutting edge speaking for a lot of other Americans. It was not just a matter of the Congressional Black Caucus or minority rights having been abused. There were a lot of other angry Americans, a lot of other angry Democrats that are our own party members, and we felt we were on the front lines for them as well. And that anger, you know, and the feeling that the Democratic Party somehow failed us in terms of its defense of the right to vote, you know, it did carry over. And of course, some things have happened as a result. We have the whole Voter Protection Act. We have a number of things that are continuing to go. And of course, Ohio was a different kind of conspiracy, but it also, in my opinion, was a conspiracy. But so I think, you know, we were frustrated, but we felt it was the right thing to do, and that we were making a great contribution to America.
The power of the Congressional Black Caucus evolved considerably during your tenure. It began as a very tiny little group here in the House and rose to a much larger group, over 43 members, I believe it is now. And the power of the Black Caucus has risen and is perceived to have fallen in recent years. Can you describe that trajectory, how that cycle has borne itself out, and what the causes of rising and falling might have been?
Oh, I don't know about falling. The New York Times referred to us as a powerful Congressional Black Caucus last week in an article, in an editorial, I think. So it's all about perception there. But I think the founders, the eight or nine people who originally founded the caucus, ought to be congratulated for what they did. They started something which has held on. It stuck together through a lot of crises, and the reason they started it was in recognition of the fact that one by one they were insignificant, but collectively they could get a lot done, and one by one they could not hope to repeat the performance of Adam Clayton Powell. I think they all felt that when Adam Clayton Powell sort of faded from the scene, that each one was going to try to be a replica of him, and it was going to look ridiculous with everybody trying to replace Adam Clayton Powell, his high visibility. So they sort of took an oath among themselves, let's work collectively together. Well, that was a pretty rocky situation, because right away Shirley Chisholm announced she's running for president and began to sort of project herself out from the rest of the group. But they held together, and over the years they've held together, and I think at the first dinner they had, Ossie Davis was the speaker at the dinner, and he talked about it's not the man, it's the plan. You got to get him an agenda, and you cannot represent just your own constituents in your own district. You have to represent all of Black America, and you have to have a master plan for doing that. That notion has hung on, despite the fact that we don't really have a very well-conceived master plan. Master plan has not been revised enough, and there are a number of problems, and that's one of the things I write about. We had some magnificent triumphs and a lot of blunders, and among those triumphs, of course, was the passage of the Martin Luther King holiday bill, which was not very easy. Reagan, if you recall, vetoed it, and we got the Republicans to override it. The passage of the Sanctions Against South Africa bill, which Reagan again was against, and he vetoed it, and we got the Republicans to override it, join us in overriding it. So you know, there have been some triumphs there. The return of the Democratic government to Haiti was one. We actually got George Herbert Walker Bush to go into Somalia. That later on became a nightmare for Clinton, but it was a great humanitarian move that an outgoing president made. It was at the request of the caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus. The inauguration of Nelson Mandela, the period leading up to that, where they had to have a lot of advice, a lot of technical assistance. They helped negotiate with Leclerc and the whites and put together a constitution and so forth. The Congressional Black Caucus was very much, members and our staff and so forth were very much involved in that. It's a great triumph. And you know, right down the line, there's certain kinds of things that got done with respect to schools and school construction that nobody else was pushing for. That's the highest priority of the caucus. we really played a major role in the Americans with Disabilities Act because it was considered sort of an impossible act to pass because 14 different committees had jurisdiction over pieces of it. But fortunately, 50% of the items were under jurisdiction of my subcommittee. And I got the help of the whole Black Caucus. And I think our first hearing, Jesse Jackson was a witness. And Justin Dart, who was the leader of the disability community, wanted it to be parallel to the civil rights movement. And like the third piece of a troika, women's civil rights for minorities, civil rights for women, and now civil rights for people with disabilities. It all sold very well, and we overwhelmed the opposition. And after my committee passed the 50% of it, the other committees fell in line, and we passed that. And people don't look at it as an achievement by a minority caucus, but it was very much